This is Bible School Radio, KDKR, Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC, Commerce, and KMWC, Bethany. On the web at kdkr.org and on all your devices with the Live 365 app. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, we have a Fed decision. What was the verdict? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Listen, if you got a question for me, I do have a resource for you at the website, prudentmoney.com. Just go to the top of the page. You'll see a link to Ask Prudent Money, and go to that link, and it'll take you to a Q&A. Send in your questions. We'd love to get your questions, and that's how we operate as what I call financial ministry. And we'll get that question answered and get the information back to you. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, this is a date that we've been or had circled on the calendar for a long time. And it's taken a lot of turns and misdirections, and here we come to today, which is really the first Federal Reserve Board meeting. And I'm going to explain all this to you, so just hang with me here. But the first Federal Reserve Board meeting where we actually get an idea on interest rates, that the expectation was there will be some movement in interest rates. What this does for the consumer could be a big break in the costs of lending and borrowing money, spending money. Not that we want people to go out and create a bunch of debt, but just every day consumer type activities. It's a very good thing when you see the ability of the Federal Reserve Board to lower rates. But first, let's take a look at who is the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve is the main central bank in the United States. And really, it's such a big central bank that you could almost say it doesn't really have jurisdiction, but you could say influences, probably a good word, the rest of the different countries' central banks. It's the big guy on the block. And Jerome Powell is the Fed chair, and they meet, and their whole existence is to control unemployment, keep it at a meaningful level, or employment, and the other is interest rates. And it's always a tough battle, and especially when you have an economy that is experiencing a inflationary environment, which we are starting to experience again, or a return of, for numerous reasons. And then what's the appropriate interest rate environment for the potential of an unemployment problem and maybe a recession, which we are experiencing as well. Now, they've got a name for this, and it's stagflation. And I know it's a little late in the afternoon for some of these words, but stagflation is when you have the economy going through a recession and inflation at the same time. As you can imagine, not a desirable situation. So leading up to that, the Fed has to very methodically, which there's a lot of people who don't understand this, but I get it, very methodically, because they want to do the best they can with the information that they have. make the right moves in interest rates. If you're going to control inflation, you raise interest rates. If you're going to fight a recession, you're going to lower interest rates. So if you got both, you got to do something with interest rates. What do you do? And of course, that's when all the other different little metrics come into play, and they look at all this and they figure out what the best tactic is to fight the situation that is at hand. But definitely the unemployment rate was part of the problem today, because the Fed was looking at, okay, we've got what looks like inflation starting up. And, it may be that inflation starts up and then it kind of goes away and doesn't really amount to anything. It's always hard to tell. But the problem is that once it starts a cycle, it's kind of like it's got to finish that cycle. And that cycle can be a big cycle or not. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. Just going through what exactly does happen. Now, today's announcement was one that everybody had their eyes on, and it was pretty well expected that the Fed would lower interest rates by 0.25%. Because really of what's happening on the unemployment rate. I think if the unemployment rate and it's a lot more difficult to get a job these days. I think if that wasn't showing some signs of weakening, they probably would have stood still and not done anything. But I think that pretty much they called today's rate cut a risk management cut, which I get that too. It makes total sense. But employment has definitely deteriorated since last meeting. So what market watchers are trying to understand and get from the Fed from a meeting like today, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in the present? And then what are you going to do in the future? And so what the Fed Chair Jerome Powell said, that we're lowering it 0.25% today, and then we are going to adjust interest rates either up or down at least 2 more times in 2025 and maybe 1 more time in 2026. So he's taken this very conservatively, which absolutely our president does not care for. We'll get to that in a minute. But what the Fed is doing, they're not controlling interest rates. They're influencing interest rates. So just because they go up or down on interest rates, and I'll tell you what that's called here in a second, just because they go up or down on interest rates doesn't mean that mortgage rates, for instance, go up or down. It doesn't, but it influences the way the market is going as far as interest rates go. So the way that they do that, the way they influence rates, is they lower or they raise what's called the federal funds rate. And that is what influences interest rates. And the specific interest rate that everybody watches is the Treasury bond, the 10-year Treasury bond. Okay, I hope I haven't driven you to go listen to something else. It's really important, not that you completely understand this, but that you have an idea of what's going on, because I really think that the remainder of this week is going to be a very big turning point, one way or the other, for the market. I'll tell you why I think that in a second. So they lowered the federal funds rate, and I told you that on the 10-year Treasury bond, the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury bond is my main concern is that it doesn't go down. So think about this with me for a second, because this affects mortgage rates. It all drives back around to mortgage rates. And I believe until we get mortgage rates unstuck, that's a technical word, unstuck, then we've got a problem. And the mortgage the real estate markets are not really moving like we need them to move. And I just like to refer to it as it's stuck. And today, what ended up happening, I mean, ideally, interest rates would have gone down. But, here's the thing. So everybody was pretty well predicted and was comfortable with that the Fed was going to go down 0.25%. That was pretty well known. 0.5% would have been something that most people weren't counting on. But I think what will end up being a negative is that interest rates on the 10-year Treasury bond went up, and they went up a lot. And that's what I've been talking about that really brings a concern into the conversation, is that we want to see the interest rates go down, because it is the mortgage rates that are really preventing people from jumping out there and taking on a big mortgage, because it's just more expensive. If you said, we're out to buy a house, 4 years ago, we're getting, 3.25% mortgage rate, we can buy that expensive home. We can pay more. Today, you can't do that because interest rates have driven mortgage rates up. So that is the problem that we've been talking about for weeks, is that what happens if interest rates go up when the Fed goes down? And that's what happened today. So 1.25% is what the 10-year Treasury interest rate or yield went up. Not what we wanted to see. We'll talk more about this on the other side. This is Bob Brooks. We're up against a break. Stick around. I'll be right back.
Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Dr. Charles Stanley.
The only way in the world for me to think the way God thinks is to find out how He thinks. How am I going to find out how He thinks? The best way to find out how He thinks is to read what He said about Himself. The only way to renew the mind is to begin to fill the mind with the Word of God, the thoughts of God.
The teaching of Dr. Charles Stanley on In Touch, helping you grow in Christ every day.
In Touch, weekdays at 12:30.
How do you celebrate when God brings you victory? Thursday on Focal Point, Pastor Mike Fabarez examines the surprising elements that should characterize our response to answered prayers. Through the dramatic story of Hezekiah's miraculous deliverance from 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, he unpacks what it truly means to honor God when trials turn to triumphs. Thursday on Focal Point.
Focal Point, weekday mornings at 8:30, here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. So we're talking about the Federal Reserve Board and their interest rate decision today and what that might mean for mortgage rates. I didn't specifically see mortgage rates, what they did one way or the other. I'm really concerned with two aspects of this story. The first one is what the 10-year Treasury bond interest rate did today. I was concerned with that. Would like to have seen it go down, went up a lot, because that affects mortgage rates. And for any of you who are trying to buy a house, wanting to buy a house, it's tough because interest rates are not cooperating. The next thing is follow through. What will they be tomorrow? What will they be Thursday? What will they be Friday? And I really believe these markets have been ready to move, and we'll see if it, affects things negatively or maybe positively. It could reverse course tomorrow. So who knows? We're not trying to be forecasting anything because it's kind of a loser sport. But as far as the market goes, this is no big surprise to the market. I guess it will take a little bit for the market to digest, the stock market, to digest these numbers. Usually you don't see the full effect of Fed meetings until the next day, which would be tomorrow. So the Dow Jones was up a little over 0.5%. For the S&P 500 was a little, probably you just call that flat. Didn't do much of anything. And the NASDAQ was down about 0.33%. All in all, not any big deal. So we'll see and keep you posted on what happens tomorrow. In fact, make sure that you listen in tomorrow, because I'm having, and I can't think, Mark Blythe is his name. This guy knows the full story about how inflation works, what we're not seeing, where he says policymakers are making a mistake. And he's going to be on the program to talk about his new book, Inflation. And I can't remember the rest of it. But, I can't. I'm not even going to try to guess it. That'd probably be worse. I should have looked up before I got on the air. Anyway, looking forward to getting his insight into this. And we will ask all the questions that we need to be asking and get a good read on it. So what does this mean for you as far as a car loan goes, as far as credit cards? Credit cards, they could drop a full % in interest rate and it wouldn't matter. I mean, it's just so disgusting what the politicians are not doing to curb interest rates and prevent the Bank of America's, Citibanks, Morgan, Chase banks from the world of increasing. If I left out about 30 other participants in the credit card industry, those are all counted as well. But they don't do anything to keep them from raising interest rates on the everyday consumer, sometimes paying 25, 30, 35%. It's ridiculous. So it'd have to move a lot to move the needle, as they say. But probably not going to be much of a move, unfortunately. Car loans, automotive loans, I could see some movement going. That would be exciting if you're trying to buy a car. So we'll report. I'll report back to you tomorrow what I find out about that. But let's talk about President Trump. And what President Trump wants is he wants low interest rates. He wants them yesterday. And the problem is that what President Trump wants, there's a process that you go through, and it does not involve the office of the presidency. Jerome Powell is pretty much just like any other Federal Reserve Board chairman, pretty much bulletproof. They can't be fired. The only way that they can be let go or lose their job or lose their position is if they do something like they steal money or they kill somebody or something like that. I mean, egregiously break the law. And in fact, I don't know that President Trump knew that, but he tried to fire Jerome Powell and obviously found out that wasn't going to happen. In fact, he tried to fire one of the Fed governors in the appellate court, I believe that I may get that wrong. One of the courts said, nope, can't do that without evidence and cause. I think that she had a question about a mortgage or something, that there's some mortgage fraud. But anyway, she's back and she voted today. Ironically, Trump just appointed an individual to the board that has voting rights, and he was the only one that said, hey, I'm voting for a half a percent increase. He was the only one that voted for half a percent. So we, of course, know where those directives came from. But the irony of it is, and Trump, let's just say that he's not going to invite Jerome Powell over to the White House anytime soon. But he is the one who appointed Jerome Powell in 2016. And, of course, now he wants to get rid of him. So it'll be interesting to see. I know that I think he's in England today. So it'll be interesting to see when he gets back what he has to say. Because I'm sure he will not be happy, because this isn't even remotely as aggressive as he would like to see Jerome Powell be. So we'll see what happens here going forward, and I'll keep you posted. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website. At the top of the page, there is a link to the Q&A, and you can send in your question. Love to get your thoughts, your comments, and questions, and get you taken care of. So that's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Quick question here from a listener that says, I have kids from a first marriage and a second marriage. What steps can my wife and I take so there will be no problems at our death? This is a complicated situation when you have a mixed family of two different marriages, two sets of kids, and when it comes to assets that are inherited at both parents' death. And you can circumvent this. I was talking to a client this afternoon, and she said, I've been through 2 deaths in the past 2 months, and they were incredibly problematic and disorganized because there was no paperwork. There was no legal documents that gave instructions to do anything. And that's a tough way to leave your family. And I want to suggest to you that that's not necessary, and it's something that you can take care of very easily. So the chances of a internal squabble between 2 families, 2 sets of kids, different parents, is, I don't know if it's high, but it's definitely, if left up to them to figure it all out, they're going to have different opinions of where assets go. But what you want to do is you definitely want to make sure that everything that you own is properly filled out with a beneficiary designation. And what that means is, something happens to Dad, then child 1 and or the wife gets everything if the wife's still alive. If the wife dies, then child 1 and child 2, child 3 are split everything up by a third, and then you have the secondary beneficiaries. You want to make sure that that is on everything that is an account. Now, your IRAs and your 401k plans all have primary beneficiaries associated with them. And you want to double check. In fact, add this to your list, just to say, to call your investment company tomorrow and say, hey, who do you have down as the beneficiary, just to make sure there's no problems. Because I've heard stories where a couple will get divorced and say the man gets remarried and the man dies and he never changed the beneficiary, and the ex-wife is on as beneficiary, and guess what? she gets the money. No question, no arguing, she gets the money. That supersedes everything. So you want to make sure that every beneficiary directive is correct. Also, things like savings accounts, you want to give them the ability to take over the account if something happens. But there's more to this. We'll talk a little bit more the next time. This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.
Prudent